Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me today. We have a big crowd here with us, and we're going to talk today about EAT and what the Quality Raters Guidelines say about EAT, and a little bit about what my team and I have learned in the years that we've been doing site reviews and looking at EAT. So the way this is going to work is I have a bit of a presentation that we'll do. Those of you who have heard me speak at conferences, some of this is going to sound a bit familiar. We're going to actually do 3 parts to this webinar. So today we're going to talk about what EAT is and what the Quality Raters Guidelines are, and what we can learn about how Google is likely using this information in their algorithms. We're also going to have a part 2, which will be probably just after Christmas, maybe into the new year. Part 2, we're going to talk specifically about author EAT. So if you have questions that relate to the EAT of your authors, and especially if you're a medical site and you have questions about medical authors, that type of thing, then stay tuned for part 2. And in part 3, we're going to talk about trust. And trust is really important for sites that dropped with the August 1st update and also the September 27th update. Those of you who are watching this live, thank you, first of all. We do have chat available, and some of my team are moderating the chat, and they're going to share with me the best questions. I know some of you have asked questions beforehand. We had so many questions that we won't be able to get to all of them, but we've picked out the ones that we think are going to be the most helpful for the rest of you who are watching this. You've probably noticed I have some of my team behind me. If you guys want to say hi. I don't know. So this is our office here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. What we do is we spend most of our days doing site reviews. A good part of our site reviews involves looking at the Quality Raters Guidelines and sort of assessing sites in the eyes of these guidelines. And I'm going to share with you some examples of what the kind of things that we see that we think are connected to these guidelines. So bear with me as I do some technical stuff here. We're going to share my screen and we'll start doing a presentation here of slides. Okay. And all right. So first of all, what we're going to talk about is this thing called EAT. And most of you, if you're here in the webinar, then you already have heard of EAT. You know that there's some significance in terms of SEO. And I want to tell you that what I'm sharing with you, there are certain parts that I'm going to say, look, a Google employee said this, and or Google announced this type of thing. There are other parts, though, that are our theory. And so I think this is really important as SEOs, that we should sort of distinguish when we're talking about something that we think is true and something that we pretty much know is true. And so hopefully I'll be able to distinguish between those. Just a little bit, you already saw some of my team, but again, we do mostly site quality reviews. And if you want to reach us, and we do have a bit of a waiting list for these reviews, but we'd be happy to help you out, hopefully. So let's talk about the Quality Raters Guidelines. These guidelines are given by Google to people called quality raters. There are at least 10,000 quality raters in the world. I've heard estimates of up to 100,000. They're contracted out by external companies, so they're not actually employees of Google. And it's important to know that the quality raters are not the web spam team. So the guidelines are meant to teach the quality raters how to determine whether a website is high quality. And when Google does a change in their algorithms, let's say the engineers decide they want to work on making a certain type of spam not rank properly or rank well, then what they'll do is they'll change the algorithm, and then they'll show the results to the quality raters and have them assess websites in the eyes of these guidelines. So a lot of people have argued, well, the algorithms, there's no way they could algorithmically determine some of the stuff that's in these guidelines. And I think a lot of the stuff they actually can determine algorithmically. So when Google first came out with the guidelines, initially they were private. You could only see them if you were a quality rater, and there were occasionally leaked copies that would come out, and as SEOs, we'd all start reading them. And then in 2013, Google started actually publicly making these available for everybody to read. So you can read the Quality Raters Guidelines. Just do a search for Google Quality Raters Guidelines, and they're about 160 pages or so. I find them really interesting reading. It takes a while to get through some of the examples that they've given there. But if you've ever wanted to know, whenever there's an algorithm update, somebody from Google always says, oh, well, the key is to create a high quality site. And, this Google has just said that this is transparency on how Google works and how to understand what Google looks for in web pages. So these are really important. And just to sort of hammer that point in, this was from an interview with Ben Gomes, VP of Search at Google. And he said, the Quality Raters Guidelines, they don't tell you exactly how the algorithm is ranking results, but they fundamentally show what the algorithm should do. And that's really important. So there may be parts of the Quality Raters Guidelines that aren't yet in the algorithm, but these show you where Google wants to go. And so some of the things that we point out, there's a lot of discussion lately about whether Google uses the BBB, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. And the thing is, whether or not they use it in the algorithm, that's what they use to give the raters to test whether their algorithms are working properly. So we still want to pay attention to all of these things. So this tweet came from Danny Sullivan under the Google Search Liaison Twitter handle. And one of the reason why I pointed this out is because people always say, Google makes updates every day. There's probably 3 to 4 updates to the algorithms every single day. But every now and then he says there are broad changes. So we call those core quality updates. Those of you who've been in this profession for a while, you'll remember when Panda first came out and when Penguin came out, these were really specific updates. But when we do core quality updates, when we see those, often, Google doesn't tell us exactly what they are. And so this type of update happens several times per year. This year, we've had a crazy number of what I'd call mild quality updates. Almost every week, we see a significant change in rankings for sites. And but there have been just a few that have been major updates. And some of those include March 9th of 2018, August 1st, and then also September 27th were massive updates that affected a large number of sites. So I want to take you back a little bit to February of 2017. On this date, February 7th, I believe this is when Google first started really implementing things from the Quality Raters Guidelines into their algorithms. Now, I don't have proof for this, but the reason why I say this is because, so I've been doing site reviews for quite a few years now. And at this point, starting early March or so, probably even mid-February, I started getting all sorts of site owners that had graphs of analytics traffic that looked like this or worse. And it was really very obvious that something big had happened on February 7th. We didn't even give this update a name. A month later was what we called Fred, but I think Fred actually started with this February 7th update. And every site that I reviewed, it was really obvious that they were lacking in EAT, which we'll explain in just a minute. And so, I think 5 days after this update, Gary Ish from Google tweeted this random reminder that, hey, we should be reading the Quality Raters Guidelines. And so that sort of backed up my suspicion that, EAT could potentially be a factor here. And then going to the August 1st update, Danny Sullivan, he did the same thing when people ask, well, how do I recover from an algo hit? And he said, have great content. But he also pointed out that if you want to know how to have great content, you should be reading the Quality Raters Guidelines. And just a little bit of a brag here, he followed that tweet up with this tweet that retweeted me. And we were sharing about a client of ours that we had implemented a number of things based on our review from the standpoint of the Quality Raters Guidelines. And this site saw, a significant improvement. This is a traffic estimate from SEMrush. And they've been continuing to see improvements, and a lot of this we attribute to EAT. We did also work on some other things on the site too, so it's hard to say that it was 100% EAT. And then at the same time on August 1st, there were a great number of sites that had traffic graphics that looked like this. And, this is devastating when a drop like this happens. So starting February 7th of 2017, pretty much every site that we felt was hit with a broad core quality update had some type of issue with EAT. So most of you probably know that EAT stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. And people would argue, well, how does Google measure this? So I'm going to show you some things in the Quality Raters guidelines that give us some hints as to how Google could measure this. I also want to emphasize that this is not just expertise. I see all the time people saying, oh, but I'm a doctor and my rankings dropped and I've been practicing for 20 years. But if you're not recognized online as an authority, then you're going to be lacking the A. And in we'll talk a little bit about trust too. And again, in the third part of this webinar, we're going to talk in great detail about trust. And so it's important to know that EAT is very multifaceted. It's not just, whoever has the most experience wins. So this is from the Quality Raters guidelines, and they tell us that the amount of EAT that a site has is very important. They say that EAT is made up of the main content quality and amount of content, website information, website reputation, which we'll talk about in a minute. They all make up the EAT of a website. It's important to talk about what YMYL means. So if you are in one of these areas, medical, financial, legal, if you sell anything on your website, you're definitely considered YMYL. And this is important because EAT is a big deal for YMYL sites. If you are lacking EAT and you're a YMYL site, you're not going to rank well. And there are different YMYL sites. So the example in the Quality Raters guidelines says that if you are a site that talks about adoptions, you're not really legal, a little bit legal, you're not really medical, but you're very important in terms of helping people make decisions in their lives. So of the sites that we've reviewed, I would say almost all of them are sites that we would consider YMYL. News sites are also considered YMYL. So, if you do fit into one of these categories, this is where EAT is most important. And I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but this sort of emphasizes that, if you're YMYL, it's very important to have EAT. And so the part that I've highlighted at the bottom here says, if expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness are lacking, then these are to be considered low quality sites. So that's very, very important. The guidelines have this list of characteristics of a high quality page. And I think I would urge all of you to, search out the guidelines and read all of these. We're just focusing on EAT today, but this is really a blueprint for what Google considers high quality. And the very first characteristic of a high quality page is to have a high level of EAT. They also have a list of characteristics of low quality pages. And of course, the very first thing is that there is a lack of EAT. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that Google says, I think EAT is mentioned in the Quality Raters guidelines 186 times. So it is really, really important. And so the question that everybody always has is, can we improve EAT? And I'll tell you that you can for some businesses, but it's difficult. If you are a legitimate business, then you really should be able to build up EAT, which I'll share with you in a minute how we're going to do this. Where we've had some sites that we've reviewed where our conclusions are that you are probably not going to rank again. And these are sites that mostly existed on tricks and loopholes and ways, they were buying links, they were using PBNs, things like that. And so Google really only wants to rank sites that have high EAT. So back in February of 2018, I was at PubCon Austin, and I asked Gary, this was Gary Ish from Google, he was doing a talk, a keynote talk, and I asked him in the question period, how does Google algorithmically determine EAT? And he said it's largely based on links and mentions on authoritative sites. And it's really interesting that he said mentions. So he said, if the Washington Post mentions you, that speaks to your EAT. He also said that Google knows which parts of the web can be easily bought into. And so he mentioned if you get a link in the contributors section of Forbes, that Google knows that those are very easy to buy and that link probably wouldn't speak to your EAT. So the point here, the vast majority of where Google gathers EAT information is about what other authoritative sites are saying about you. And so this is an important thing to know. So here's how the quality raters are instructed to find this information. And we think, now we don't know exactly how Google is doing this algorithmically, but this is the process that the raters are told to use in order to assess whether the algorithms are doing their job. So the first thing is they're told to look for reviews. And they're specifically told to look for reviews on sites like Yelp, the Better Business Bureau. If it's an e-commerce site, then Amazon, Google Shopping. And this doesn't apply to every site. So whenever I bring this up, people always say, well, it doesn't make sense for my business to be on Yelp, or none of my competitors are on these sites, or we live in a country where the BBB isn't even used. And the point here is not that Google has an algorithm that's one-to-one, like, if your BBB rating is this, then your rankings is this. It's Google's trying to find the overall, are there problems with your business? And so we do think that you should be, so what we do is we look at whether your competitors have, let's say your competitors all have Yelp listings and they all have multiple reviews and they're all 4 or 5 stars, and you have, maybe one review and it's negative. That's a sign that you should be working on building up your Yelp presence. And we can't prove that 100%, but this is what the raters are told to look for. They're also told to look for information like this. So this is really interesting. If you were doing research on the company IBM, the part that I've highlighted there says, if you put this into Google, it's saying, all right, I want to see all the results that talk about the company IBM, but are not IBM's site themselves. And so we do this in our site quality reviews. This is an example. Dome Climber is given as an example in the quality raters guidelines as a low quality site for a number of reasons. And if you do this search, you'll see that people are saying, like, this doesn't perform as expected. It has a reputation score of 13%, which apparently is bad. And if you do not purchase from this company, you'll be swindled. And so this site saw massive drops, in conjunction with quality updates, because Google does not want to rank sites where everybody is complaining. And I know some of you right now are thinking, well, doesn't that open the door for negative SEO? People leaving negative reviews all over the place. And I think in some places, potentially it can. But one of the things that the guidelines talk about is whether or not you're responding to reviews. And so even if you are getting negative reviews left, you can still respond to those. And those should, that should help improve your overall reputation. So it's important to know that the guidelines say that even a mildly negative reputation can be a sign for a low rating. So you really want to pay attention to your reputation online. So let's talk a little bit about the BBB. The guidelines actually say, please consider low ratings on the Better Business Bureau site to be evidence for negative reputation. And this is a screenshot taken from the guidelines where I didn't put that red line there. They actually pointed out that this business has an F rating and this should be considered a low quality site. Now, the question is, why would Google rely on a third-party site like this? And an interesting thing came up just a couple of weeks ago. The BBB actually tweeted out about a company that they had given an F rating because they found that the company was involved in some fraud and stuff like that. And so I went and looked at the traffic stats on SEMrush, and the traffic actually showed that they were hit with the August 1st update, but yet their BBB rating didn't change till it was like October or something. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that if we were doing a review on this site today, of course we would say, yes, you have an F rating and you're going to have to fix that in order to be considered high quality. But Google recognized that there were problems with this business even before the BBB gave them an F rating. So my point here is that, yes, we look at these things. I think it's possible that Google could be creating a score in the aggregate and saying, if competitors all have A ratings or they have, one of the things that we've seen a lot is not necessarily the letter rating corresponding to ranking hits, but the number of negative reviews, and especially the negative reviews that are not responded to. So these are all things. And if BBB is not in your area, then look at what sites are actually doing reviews in your area. So when I spoke at Brighton SEO, a lot of people there said, well, Trustpilot tends to be the authority. So look again, if your competitors are getting reviews on Trustpilot, then do you have as many? Do you have as good of a review profile? I wanted to share this. Now, draxe.com, they're not clients of ours, but a lot of people point them out when we start talking about EAT. This site saw massive hits on August 1st, which was the medic update. And if you look at Dr. Axe's bio, he kind of looks like a guy that should have a lot of EAT. I mean, he's a certified doctor. We debated whether, the fact he was a doctor of natural medicine negated that, but legitimately, like, he's got authority. He's recognized by a lot of people. So why should his site drop? And what people didn't look at was the T in EAT. Dr. Axe, his Better Business Bureau profile used to have not only an F rating, but this massive red banner that said, like, it was screaming out to people, do not use this company. There were lots of people complaining about refunds and other things like that. Now, it's interesting to see that since then, this profile has changed. And I think it actually it's like a different company name now. And so there's no F rating. They're building up new reviews, and nothing has changed in terms of their rankings. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that, Google's not just looking at this one thing. Again, it's not one-to-one that if this rating is bad, your rankings are bad. They can collect signals from all around the web to determine that this company has trust issues. So I do think that they can recover. I think that they can, improve on whatever the issues were. And I do expect that at some point in the future, and who knows how long, they'll start seeing some improvements again. Another place that's talked about in the Quality Raters guidelines is Wikipedia. And again, people would say, well, why would they use information from a third-party site? We know that they're using it. Most of the information that's in knowledge panels comes from Wikipedia or similar sources. And so this is something that's from one of our site quality reviews. And what we commonly do is we look at the sites that are ranking number 1 for your main 1, 2, and 3 for your main keywords. And it's uncanny how often we see that all the sites that are ranking well have their own Wikipedia page, and the client that we're reviewing that saw drops does not have a Wikipedia page. I do think that Wikipedia mentions can count for something. And if you think about it, the only way to get into Wikipedia is if you legitimately are an authoritative business. Now, if you are, you should try to get a Wikipedia page. It's challenging to do that, and we don't have time to get into all the specifics on that. But most likely, I do think that Google actually has something in the algorithm that says, if this company has its own Wikipedia page, that speaks to their authority. The next thing that we'll talk about is just doing really awesome things and getting press. So the guidelines say that news articles can be a source of EAT information. And again, Google knows when somebody's actually writing about you because you've done something awesome, as compared to, like, you spread out a press release or you paid a bunch of journalists to write about you. And I know people would argue, well, how would Google know the difference? I can tell you from years of auditing links that it's really obvious when a company is artificially producing PR as opposed to generating it because they're truly a great company. I'm a big fan of Harrow, Help a Reporter Out. It's a place where you can get 3 emails a day from journalists who are looking to connect with sources. And so that's one thing you can do to help build up your EAT is reply to Harrow requests, and then often you can get mentioned in authoritative places. The guidelines also talk about news articles from well-known news sites. So in your industry, you should see who are the big players and how can I get mentions on those sites. So this was a really cool thing that Barry Schwartz did at Search Engine Roundtable, where he decided to honor a bunch of SEOs. And I truly was honored that he included me on this list. My joke I always make is, I don't know why he's pointing an empty wine glass at my head, and I'm kind of hoping that I drank it. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that my being mentioned in Search Engine Roundtable speaks to my authority in SEO. So think of who the authorities are in your niche and how can you get them to mention you. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, there's no way they'd ever mention me. So one of the things that works really well is to produce fantastic research. If you can produce studies with numbers and stats and things that people want to quote, and that can get the attention of authoritative sites, then that's the type of mention that really can help. This one here, the reason why I use this GIF is that if you've been doing link building for, in the pre-Penguin days, you probably didn't pay much attention to forums, because those are links that are easy to make and easy to spam. But the Quality Writers Guidelines actually talk about forum discussions being a source of EAT information. So one of the things that we think is that Google can probably recognize if people all over the web are saying great things about your business, are talking about this fantastic product that you have, or whatever, that speaks to your EAT. So for example, for years I did mostly penalty work. And if you look at Google, any forums, whether it's Google, Moz, SEO chat, a bunch of those forums, if you see discussions on penalties, there's a good chance that my name is mentioned. And so that speaks to my authority in terms of dealing with Google penalties. So I'm not telling you to all go out and spam the forums. But I do think that it's important to be listening to forums and jump in and join the conversation where, especially if somebody's saying something bad about your brand, then jump in and try to rectify it. So we don't want to run out and spam forums with links, but we do want to do all we can to encourage people to be talking about our business. I'm just going to touch on this briefly. The guidelines do talk a lot about the EAT of individual authors, and there's a lot of discussion on that. Recently, there was something that Bill Swalski wrote about on the Go Fish Digital blog about whether or not Google is actually ranking documents based on a score for authors, and that's not to be confused with the old authorship. This is a topic that I could go on about for quite a while, and so we're going to do this in our next webinar. And I know some of you have asked questions on this. We're going to push that to the next webinar, which again should be at some point in early January. But I did want to point out this site that was a client of ours that we worked on improving. They had medical content, and we actually brought in, they brought in physicians to fact check their medical content, and they saw really nice improvements with the August 1st update. So we're going to go into more detail about that in part 2 of our series. And so that concludes the slide portion of this. I want to share these links with you. If you're not already a member of our newsletter, then I would really encourage you to do that. There's a free version that if you just want to know, here's the changes Google made, here's the announcements that they made, that's in the free version. The paid version, which is $18 US a month, it gives you additional insight and a bunch of tips, and we've got a lot of really good feedback that it's quite valuable. Those of you who want more information on Medic, if you were hit by Medic, I really would encourage you to read the link mariehaynes.com/trust. And there's a lot of information there about what I think Google is doing in terms of Medic and evaluating trust. So we'll get to that in part 3 of this series. And if you are a paid member of my newsletter, then you have access to this ebook that I wrote. It's a summary of the Quality Writers Guidelines and a bit of a checklist that we use in order to evaluate sites. So you can get that book at that mariehaynes.com/book. So at this point, I think we'll move over to questions, and this is where we'll see if the tech works okay for me. Let's see here. Hang on, guys. All right, and my slideshow. Okay. So I'm going to get on to some of these questions. Now we have 2 places where we've asked questions. Some of you in the chat have a bunch of questions, and then we've got a bunch of questions that were already asked before. So I'm going to start with some of the questions we had asked before, because we had a lot of really good ones, and then we'll move on to some of the chat questions as well. So first question. We have a very extensive About Us page with tons of content about our employees and their extensive expertise in our industry, but the page is not optimized for SEO. Is EAT specifically on an About Us page more for manual auditors or for Google bots? So that's really a good question. Your About Us page is where what we always recommend is that you do all you can to brag about your EAT. And so we actually have one client that was really well known as an authority, but it wasn't, actually this comes up kind of often, and one of the sites we're reviewing right now is the same situation, that they did nothing on their website to actually share how they were known as authorities. And so we like to see on the homepage as well as the about page things like how many years of experience you've had, your authoritative mentions. You can say as mentioned in the New York Times or even your local newspaper, wherever you've had news mentions, you should put that on your about page. The question is whether Google actually looks at your own about page, or are they getting this information externally? Obviously, the external information is more important, because otherwise anybody, I could say that I could make up all sorts of things about my qualifications. With that said, we have one client that, again, was well known as an authority, and they had authoritative mentions, but they really weren't ranking well for their main keyword. And we recommended that they really beef up on their homepage. They said, we're the #1 provider of this, and we've had mentions, we have these celebrity endorsements. They put that on their about page as well. And with a subsequent quality update, I think it was 2 or 3 months later, they saw massive gains. So now that's just one site. I do think that we should be mentioning things on our about page, but I think it's not going to fix everything to just put stuff on your about page. Jump over to the chat here. Somebody asked, when you talk about forums, what about specialty Facebook groups? So Facebook's interesting. We could have a whole discussion for the entire hour about whether or not Google's using social media. The way I look at it is, if Google can see the pages, then it could speak to your EAT. So a lot of Facebook groups, if it's a private Facebook group, then Google's not going to be crawling it, and they're not going to know that. So it probably wouldn't help you. I do think, though, so one of our employees actually has a Facebook group, and noticed that whenever he posts stuff on this Facebook group that has, a pretty good engagement, that his articles tend to rank better. Now, that could just be because more people are engaging with the articles, but we really feel that if you get tons of mentions across Facebook, I'm not talking about a specific group, but across Facebook, that could really make a difference in terms of EAT. And again, the thing is to get people legitimately talking about your business. Let's see here. Somebody asked, how can you measure improvements in EAT? And that's really tough, because we're used to, as SEOs, we can say, well, I got this many links. And so I can say to my client, in the past, we used to do that, right? We used to say we'd get you X number of links per month. And that would be a good indicator. Or we could use analytics to say, well, we've increased traffic to these pages. It's very hard to determine whether Google is recognizing more EAT for you, because there's so many different factors. And who knows? I mean, we've sort of talked about creating our own sort of internal EAT score. I don't think that that's going to happen, though, because nobody knows exactly how Google is measuring these things algorithmically. But I guess what I would say is, if you were affected by a quality update in the last couple of years, and then a subsequent update happens and you see improvements, that's probably Google recognizing your EAT. But it really is a hard thing to measure. Let's see here. Somebody asked, how can we improve EAT for a dental website? So this is good. So let's talk about a small business like this, especially a local small business. It's not likely that you're going to get mentions on the New York Times. I mean, it's possible. The examples that Google gives in the quality raters guidelines are all like, oh, New York Times, Washington Post, all these super authoritative sites. But Google can recognize authorities in other areas as well. So as a dentist, I would be trying to get external mentions on sites that are known as authorities in the dental space. One thing you could be doing is Harrow. So Harrow gets a little bit overwhelming because they send 3 emails a day. But what you could do is set up Gmail filters. so that every time you get a Haro email, it only comes to your inbox if it contains the words dental, dentist, and maybe teeth. And so let's say there was a journalist who was doing a story on teeth whitening, then you can say, well, I would like to be a source for you, and give a quote on teeth whitening, and then you can get mentioned in authoritative places. The other thing I would do if I was helping improve EAT for a dentist is look at your online review profile. Are there people complaining? And if there are, and I would imagine that dentists get, a lot of, I think you're more likely to review your dentist if you've had a bad experience than if you've had a good experience. And so you need to really be looking at those reviews. And if a whole bunch of people are saying like, hey, your staff was rude to me, or you weren't on time for my appointment, or some stuff like that, then those are things that have to change. And what I would do is I would respond to those reviews, and say, I'm really sorry that happened. We're working on fixing things, and that type of thing. So, I mean, there's lots more that could be done, but those are some good places to start. Let's see here. This is a good question. Is an affiliate site that reviews household products YMYL? So we've debated this internally as well, because on one hand, you're not actually taking you're not taking transactions, you're not taking credit card information. But on the other hand, you're helping people make decisions on purchases. So I'm trying to think if we've had sites. I don't know that we've had any sites. I got to ask my team behind me here. Have we had sites that were affiliate that saw drops with quality updates, like that didn't sell their own products? A couple? Okay. So yeah, it's possible. I don't know that I have the answer to that. I think if you're not sure if you're YMYL, you should just consider yourself YMYL. It's really just semantics anyways, but yeah, I mean, I think and the other thing too is you're competing against sites that Google's going to want to see as trustworthy. So I would say, yes, you're probably YMYL. That's an author question. Let's see here. What do you do if content production is outsourced? Yeah, so this is an author question as well that we're going to get to. This is a big problem that a lot of sites have, is if your content is written by people who don't have authority in this area. And seriously, if you're YMYL, you're going to find that this content is not ranking well. So really, I mean, to summarize what we're going to talk about in the next webinar, you need to do all you can to actually get authoritative authors in, especially if you're trying to rank for medical content. If you think about it, like if you were just diagnosed with cancer or something like that, you don't really want to read information from somebody who's a really good writer but has no actual medical expertise, right? So really you need to spend the money to get authoritative writers, or to get people to fact check your writing. And again, this is something we could go on for quite a while on. Let's see here. Is there a way to measure EAT? And no, we go through our process of trying to figure out which sites have EAT issues. Like, it takes us a good 2 weeks to go through all of this stuff. So, I'm sure Google's probably got a little switch. I think it's possible that EAT is sort of a sliding scale. And once you get below a certain level of EAT, then all of a sudden your quality score goes down. But we don't know exactly how that happens. What if you don't have a rating on the BBB? So I think I sort of talked about this before, but again, if the BBB is not used in your area, then you should look at the sites that are getting reviews, whether it's Trustpilot or TripAdvisor or something like that. However, if you see that all the sites that are ranking well for your main queries have extensive BBB profiles, then yes, you should get a profile. I should point out here, though, I don't think that you need to have a paid BBB profile. In order to be fully accredited, you need to have a paid profile in the BBB. I think what the guidelines actually say, that it's not a ranking factor that you have a high rating on the BBB. It's only a ranking factor if you have a very low rating. So with that in mind, I don't think paying for accreditation is the way to go. But I do think that if everybody else has got a profile, at least have a profile and at least respond to the complaints. Which automation tools are you using for site quality audits? That's a really good question. So tools that we use. We do a lot of information from SEMrush, especially when we're looking at competitors. We like to see whether competitors have been hit, what they're ranking for. We can look at, if you have one of the higher up plans on SEMrush, you can look at historical rankings. And so often we can look back and we can say, oh, well, you were hit at this time and it was this sort of set of keywords that saw drops. That's really useful. We use Search Console, especially the section on the performance report. So one of the things that we look at is, this is not really quality raters guidelines, but more into our reviews, looking for thin content. We look at the content that was indexed, discovered, but not indexed. And that content often is a source of thin content. In terms of links, we use mostly Hrefs. I think Majestic and Moz are still very, very good tools. Back in the days when I was doing a lot of penalty work, I got really, really familiar with Hrefs, and so that's the tool I use the most. We also use Sitebulb for crawling sites. We kind of use that for our more extensive audits. We don't do that for every single audit, but Sitebulb is really good, especially if we're looking at sites that have issues with their URL structure. I really like the crawl maps on Sitebulb. And, that's probably about it in terms of tools. So the majority of what we do in our audit work is really just manual hard work, and comparing, looking at sites that are doing well and figuring out, like, why are they doing well when this client that came to us is not? And so hopefully that's helpful. This is an interesting question. Our staff page gets a lot of traffic where we only have names and pictures of our staff. Should I add more content there to increase SEO, like employee background and things like that? So I think you probably already know the answer to that. I mean, there's no harm in adding content. And the way to answer a question like this is to think of, would it actually make things better for your potential customers if they saw that content? So if people are looking at your employee page, then yeah, you want to do everything you can to say, like, hey, our employees are awesome, and here's all their qualifications, and here's why you should work with them, and potentially here's how you contact them. So yeah, I don't think in terms of, like, I'm not talking about on page just having keywords there, but just doing everything you can to tell people, here's why you should trust us. And this is why we also recommend having EAT related information on your homepage, because, let's say you're a lawyer and people come to your website and you've said, like, hey, we're recognized as the #1 lawyer in the city, or in the last year we won this many cases, or we've won these awards, just anything like that. That's going to encourage people to potentially use your business more. Okay, this is a good question. What if I'm known for several expertises? I'm known as a professional dancer for my dance website, and I'm also a certified personal trainer and have a company on back pain. So I think I can speak to this because most of you watching this probably know that for years I was a veterinarian, kind of a weird career change to get into SEO. That's a whole story for another day. And so assuming that if I was still practicing, I have EAT as a veterinarian, but I can also have EAT as an SEO. And I think it comes to your external mentions. So if you are mentioned, and again, it's not just enough to say, like, hey, I've been a personal trainer for 15 years or whatever. You have to be known online as an authority. And so I would be building out connections with journalists and, again, HARO requests and things like that. So I do think you can become known as an expert in multiple areas, but I also think it would be a heck of a lot of work. So sort of like in the days where we used to talk about, is it better to have one website or have multiple websites? Because then you can, try to rank for just little niche specific things. And if you have multiple websites, then all of a sudden you've got, all of these websites that you have to do work for. And so it kind of makes sense to, just focus on being known as an expert in one area. But I certainly think it could be possible for you to be known in multiple areas. I do think that that's a possibility. Would making your own Facebook group help with EAT? I don't know. I guess if you made a public Facebook group, and again, it was getting indexed by Google and it was getting crazy engagement, sure, I think that's possible. That's a lot of theory though, so I really don't know. Let's see. How does EAT differ from brand development, personal or company? There must be some subtle differences. So this is a good question. Often, so one of the things that's in the quality raters guidelines is they say that it should be very clear who the creator of the content is, who's responsible for the content on the website. So let's say that you have a website that talks about a bunch of medical issues and you have multiple authors, then each post should have its own author box that says, this is written by this person and this is why they're an authority in the space and why they're qualified to write about this. But let's go back to the lawyer's website. And so let's say this particular lawyer is a firm with, I don't know, 3 people in it. And so the content, it's not like your page on how we deal with accident claims is going to have an author bio at the end. That kind of doesn't make sense, right? So in that case, Google would likely look at the EAT of your business. And I think that Google can recognize like, okay, this firm is recognized as an authoritative business in that particular city. I still think that it is good to have individual author information. And I think, in the case of a legal site, you should be having all of your attorneys, extol their EAT like crazy. But I also think that for a lot of businesses, it makes more sense to build up your brand recognition. So let's talk for a second about content marketing, because that's kind of where this comes into play. A lot of people who are doing content marketing, it's sort of under the guise of like, hey, we're spreading news about our brand, but really what you're trying to do is just build links. And that's not what Google wants to see. But good content marketing is getting more awareness for your brand. Kind of what I'm doing right here is content marketing, right? This is going to spread the news about the fact that we have a business that's doing good work with site reviews. And so that's the type of content marketing. Like if I spoke on somebody else's podcast, I'm marketing my brand basically. It's a little bit different for me because my brand is associated with me. But hopefully you get the point I'm trying to make there. Let's see here. Oh yeah, so let's talk about this. A number of people have asked me whether I disagree with AJ Khan's article. So AJ is a well-known SEO, and I really respect AJ. I don't know him that well. We haven't met in person as far as I recall. But he wrote this article saying, basically, stop going so crazy about EAT, and Google is basically, just an algorithm that can look at zeros and ones. So I want to say, first of all, that I think it's good that we have differing opinions. And I think that this should be okay across all of SEO, that we should be able to disagree with each other. And so I actually disagreed with a number of points in AJ's article. And in one of my newsletter, if you're a paid subscriber, no, I think it's actually on the free version too. A couple of episodes ago in the recommending reading section, we actually summarized AJ's article and I wrote a big long thing about the parts I disagree with. I then reached out to AJ and sent him a message saying, I just want to let you know that I respect you. And so anyways, my point in saying this is to say that, yes, I disagree with a lot of his points, but that's okay, right? He might be right on some of the points. So what AJ was saying was that a lot of these updates were primarily about relevance. And I do agree with that. When the March 9th update happened, Danny Sullivan from Google basically confirmed that, yes, this is Google figuring out what queries are relevant to what sites. And I think Google got better at figuring out that if I searched for keto diet, I'm probably looking for information rather than buying a package or a product or something like that. And so Google did get better at determining relevance. The thing is, though, that it has to be way bigger than this, because we've seen I want to say like probably a couple hundred sites that have been hit by specifically the August 1st update, but also September 27th. And it's really like you can see that there are EAT issues. It's very, very clear, primarily trust issues. And these are things that they have to be measuring in some way. We could get into a whole discussion as to whether Google's using machine learning. I think that in some areas they are, but I think that they're not as advanced as they want to be at this point. But I think it's possible that algorithmically they're putting in a bunch of factors. I mean, they've got tens of thousands of quality raters. They've got a bunch of data there that they can use for machine learning. And so anyways, those of you who have read AJ's article, I think there's some really good points in it, but I would say that I'm very, very convinced that somehow Google is measuring EAT in their algorithms. Let's see what else here. We'll do about 10 more minutes, I think, of questions. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to everybody's questions. Let's see here. If your work or books are cited in other books, how should you represent those citations on your About page? That's a good question. So, and the question was, should you link to the book on Amazon or maybe to Google Books? And again, we don't know the answer to that. So I would say do what makes sense. If you were just trying to brag to anybody who came to your website about, hey, I'm an author, I wrote this book, you should pay attention to me, I would include links to everywhere. I'd do everything that you can in order to show Google that you're an author. Most likely, though, Google's already figured that out. I think, each one of us probably is a form of an entity, and Google's got all sorts of information on where your authority lies. So if you've written a book, they probably already know about it. And we had one client that sort of was on the black hat side and wanted to make up an author. And so they kind of they published this book and said they were Dr. So-and-so, and it just, it was fake EAT. And so they initially, they saw big hits, and I'm hesitating here because they actually saw some improvements recently, which I think are connected to some link building that is probably going to get shut down at some point, and not on, we didn't do this link building. My point is that, you don't want to fake, you don't want to just pretend to write a book so that Google can think that you're authoritative. They're pretty good at figuring out where the true authority lies. Let's see here. This is interesting. I declined massively since August 2018, but in the last 2 days, my traffic is literally skyrocketing. And they've done very little since the Medic update. So this happens, right? And I think sometimes when we see clients of ours that see big improvements with a subsequent update, we always want to think that it's our work that did that. But there are situations where Google just changes things in the algorithm. And all of a sudden, you used to be seen low quality, and now you're seen as higher quality, depending on what factors they changed. And that's interesting. It's in the last couple of days, because I did see Barry Schwartz had a thing on Search Engine Roundtable that there's some chatter about a potential update happening right now. I have not seen that with the clients that we monitor, but I'll have more information in a few days about that. So one of the things I would say is John Mueller from Google has said this a couple of times, that if you see, he was talking about Panda, if you see that you're going up and down with subsequent Panda updates, that usually means that you're on the edge in terms of some type of quality issue that the algorithms are looking at. And he even said that it might depend on what sections of your site Google crawled at that time, in that time frame. And it might be that you're just barely getting by in terms of being considered high or low quality. So I wouldn't just ignore everything. I would still pay attention to EAT, because I think you could continue to skyrocket, but it's also possible that Google reverses whatever that tweak is or changes things. So I wouldn't say you're, completely in the clear. Let's see here. Oh my gosh, we have a whole bunch of questions. So this is good. We'll definitely do more of these webinars. Does LinkedIn activity and content add to EAT? Because Google can see LinkedIn. So I think it does. Again, I think it's not a one-to-one representation of the algorithm, but I think we recommend for our clients that they always have a LinkedIn page for their company, that they extol their prizes or awards that they've won. So yeah, I think you should have a LinkedIn page. I also think that all of your employees should be extolling their EAT on the LinkedIn page. Again, because we don't know how Google algorithmically measures whether you're an authority, pretty much everything that you can do in order to shout out, like, here's why we are awesome, you should be doing it. And really, there's no, it's not difficult to create a LinkedIn page for your company, which, by the way, we just created a LinkedIn page. So if you're on LinkedIn, then find us out, Marie Haynes Consulting, and we're posting some good stuff on there too. Have you seen the ON code, HON code, improve medic sites? So this is something that's come up. What Richard is asking here is, there's a little badge that you can put in the footer of your site if you're a medical site to say that you've been, I believe that what they do is they actually review you for accuracy, or, it's some level of trust that's there. Again, somebody's asked John Mueller about this, and he said, same thing with the BBB. It's not like Google relies on third-party information. I think that, again, it makes sense, although I think there's a significant cost involved with having this. So it's hard to say. I think any metric where, in order to pay a bunch of money to have that on your website, probably it's not going to be a big factor. But it certainly wouldn't hurt. So again, if it makes sense to help improve trust in your readership, then it's probably a good idea to do that. Let's see here. Regarding authorship, do you think it actually helps to include content authorship if you don't have any authoritative writers? So again, this is something we'll get into in more detail in the next webinar, but if your writers, if you can't go out and get doctors for your medical content, then you can still write about expertise. So you could say, so-and-so has been writing about diabetes for the last 10 years, ever since she was diagnosed with diabetes. That gives you personal experience. It's not going to be equivalent to having, actual medical expertise. But the Quality Raters Guidelines actually talk about how you can have personal expertise. There's an example given of a site. It's for cancer. And if you look at this page, it looks like a low quality forum, but Google actually gave it as an example of a high quality site. And the reason is that the discussion is really good. It's personal anecdotes of people saying, look, when I got diagnosed, this is what happened to me. And so EAT, it depends on what you're trying to rank for, right? If you're trying to rank for, very, very, very competitive medical terms, then I think you're probably not going to be able to do that without legitimately having EAT. Let's see, we have time for a couple of more questions here. What EAT tactics can we use to regain lost traffic on this site? Is a mobile accessories e-commerce shop, and they saw hits in September 2017. And their traffic is continuing to decline. So September of 2017 was, in my opinion, I'm assuming it was the 27th probably that you saw drops, was almost completely about trust. All of the sites that we saw that had drops at this time had some type of issue that was described in the Quality Raters Guidelines as a trust thing. So some of the things for e-commerce, one would be, are people actually reviewing your products? The guidelines talk about product EAT. And so that's where they said, look at Amazon reviews, you want to see, are people talking about your products? Do your products basically have a good reputation? You also want to make sure that you have a terms and conditions page. And I do think that it's important that that page is indexed so that Google can see that you have it. And then other things too, you want to make sure that you have a very easy to find refund policy. One of the things that we do is we actually pretend that we're searching as a disgruntled customer, and we'll do a search for the brand name plus refund and see, would it be easy for somebody to find refund information about this company? And if not, that could be a sign of low trust. And then the other thing to look at, of course, is your online review profile as compared to your competitors. And so I'm guessing that if you dropped, I would imagine that there's probably some negative reviews online. I would go and respond to those reviews, respond to them in a way that shows that you've taken their critique to mind. Don't be angry in your responses, all the things like that. And so those are some tips. The third session of this webinar, I'm guessing that'll probably be late January that we do that. We'll talk specifically about trust, and we'll talk a good amount about e-commerce as well. Let's see here. I think we'll pick one more, and I'm so sorry for those that we haven't got to your question. Let's see. Do you see improvements from EAT related updates on a site primarily after a notable algo update? So that's an interesting point. And I would say yes. So this is a part where I'm getting into theory here. I can't prove this, but I think that Google has a score for every website. And your score for EAT, it could go down because you're lacking expertise, you're lacking authority, or you're lacking trust. And now let's say you went out and you got a bunch of authoritative mentions. Those links to your site are probably going to start helping rankings almost immediately. And you'll start to see a bit of improvement. But in our experience, so what I do every week is I look at all the sites that we have Google Analytics access for. And I look and see, has their traffic made a dramatic change either up or down on a particular day? And we can usually see that, for example, last week, December 4th to 6th, there were a bunch of sites that saw changes. And so what I think has happened is Google's reevaluated that score of EAT for your site. And, when they rerun this, whatever it is, determining your trust and the other factors in EAT, that could, if your score goes up on that day, then all of a sudden your rankings can start to go up. So I think you can see incremental improvements, but most commonly what we see is that all of a sudden traffic just jumps up. So, and we have quite a few more questions, but we're going to have to end it here. I'm actually kind of losing my voice a little bit. So I'd love your feedback. If you're watching this as a recorded version, then please do leave a comment. I'll be paying attention to the comments section, and we'll answer as many as I can. In fact, those of you who have asked questions in the chat, I'll do my best to get in there and answer some of those questions over the next week or so. If you are interested in hiring us, you can reach us at help@mariehaynes.com, and you can go to our website for more information on our services that we offer. And once again, I'll just put in a little plug for the newsletter, mariehaynes.com/newsletter. So thank you so much for watching this. If you're on the newsletter, you'll get notification about when the next webinar is. And if you have any feedback for me, I'd be happy to hear that, about things that worked or didn't work well in this format. So thanks. I wish you the best of luck with your rankings.